Welcome to Techtastic, where we navigate the intersection of technology and business, uncovering innovations that redefine our world.
JV Hilliard, welcome to It's Techtastic. It is lovely to have you here.
It is my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
So JV, you're the author of the Warminster series of books, and a lot of these are being made into video games.
Yeah, so the Warminster saga is a 4-book series, and for those fans of the fantasy adventure genre, it's what is known as a subgenre as epic fantasy and dark fantasy. So if you think about like Lord of the Rings as epic fantasy and Game of Thrones being dark fantasy, where the good guys don't always win, that's the genre in which I write. And I've licensed the intellectual property to a video game company that's making them both an augmented reality and a virtual reality game that gets released in 2025.
Wow. So the virtual reality, augmented reality piece is really interesting, as it's an emerging technology that is getting a lot of attention, of course. And I happen to be a sci-fi fantasy fan. I read quite a bit, and dark fantasy would be very, very much up my alley, as well as the VR game. I originally went to school a long time ago. The degree is in how humans and technology will interface going into the future. And I don't mean like UX. This was before the web. And so we were talking about what comes next, robotics and, computers and all that, and what happens. And wearables were always part of that world. And so VR, augmented reality, as a gateway to that, are a really interesting concept. And putting it into a game that's, where there's an existing world, you're touching on a whole bunch of my favorite topics in this space. Because I think the opportunity to blur the lines between the world that we live in and the fantasy worlds that we escape to in gaming or in novels is never been more approachable. And that we've got a lot of opportunity to do that, but it's getting stuck in these silos where I'm either watching the show, I'm reading the book, I'm listening to an audio version of the book, or I'm playing the game, but they don't really relate to each other. And the opportunity for that to happen and to blur that a little bit is really fascinating.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it is a nascent industry, and therefore the technologies, they haven't been married up for long yet. And, when you get a good story, whether it's something you see in a movie or you read in a book or you play in a video game, it's often translatable into varying media. So like in my case, going from book to video game or book to graphic novel, or in this case, book to, AR, VR, you have a chance to translate your story and your art into that format. But you're right. It's something is always lost in the beginning here too. Part of it is, as my art takes a different form, I can take 3 pages to describe a scene, but in a comic book, you've got 1 panel or 6 panels, right? With no words, and as an epic fantasy author whose books average 150,000 words, I now have 6 to put in that panel, right? So like there's different things that you have to sacrifice as part of that. And I also think that the adolescence that the AR, VR community is seeing, they're kind of staggering through, right? It has to grow and mature a little bit. And as a result, we've seen some start and stops. I think the most famous AR platform that's really worked out well, and one we've seen now ubiquitously for the last 6 or 7 years, is Pokemon Go. People play that on their phone. I mean, technically, I guess that's a wearable. In many respects, you're carrying your phone with you. It's not the VR goggles, but because of the clunkiness of the goggles, you don't see that yet. But if you look even at the movies like Ready Player One or the books like Ready Player One, you see people in the future wearing goggles all the time. And I think the Google Glass movement and some of the stuff we expect to see from, Apple, there's going to be an adolescence. We just have to understand we're going to be working through it. And so the connectivity and the flow and the Internet of Things may not be there for that just yet, but we're all going to get through it. And prosumers of that, people they're going to go out there and buy the next greatest thing because they want to be on the cutting edge, are going to be those that lead us there. We're going to know from them, from their customer experiences, what they like and what they don't like. And so in my game, what's exciting for me is the next step in consumerism. Like we've been approached by folks that want to sponsor the game. So when you slay the dragon and your character recovers the dragon's hoard, not only are you leveling up in the game, but when you open that treasure chest, you have stuff that you can redeem in real life. You'll have an e-coupon that will take you and give you a buy one, get one at a Subway, or a 50% off of a Starbucks, or wherever the sponsor may end up being. And so not only are you leveling up in the game, but you're also getting real life stuff that you can use and trade and potentially sell. And I think all that stuff is fun, but it's just the beginning stages of it. So we never know. And I think we've seen that over the years, from Tecmo Bowl to Madden to where we are today, with some of the stuff, where they've integrated music and sound and, the art, and how they've been able to capture famous people, actors and actresses in movies, or TV shows, or now you're seeing them appear in video games for the first time. We're getting a lot of that, and that's a much more mature space than what we're delving into. And it's an exciting time for me to help storyboard it and look at it from the outside in. Looking through a fishbowl, watching these guys fight through, taking my story and putting it in something that would be fun in a video game where anybody can take it any different direction. Like, as an author, I'm forcing you to follow my story arc. So you have to read what I write. In a video game, you could kill the hero and become the villain, as opposed to helping the hero destroy the villain. So a lot of different ways you can go with that.
The closest analogy to it in the book world would be like the choose your own adventures, because the people are going to go down their own path, but it's infinite in its variety and potential to go off the script.
Yeah, and the choose your own adventure books have been around since I was a kid. When you played Dungeons and Dragons, they would even have a short form of those, and and you would eventually figure out the way that the author wanted you to go. But it was like a single person role playing game. And you can do a lot of that, where you have single point of view shooters and stuff like that, or players, in video games these days. And I think that's, like I said before, it's a nascent tech, and we're all kind of learning as we go. And I think people understand that, so they're a lot more forgiving when it comes to that. And they just want to try something new, something they haven't seen, something they can play with. But you're right, in books, it's really hard to do that. I can't have a choose your own adventure all the time. And this is like my adventure, and I'm forcing you to live it with me.
It's fascinating because I've got a friend who's a fairly famous author, and several of his books were made into movies. And I was talking to him about that experience, because when you're writing a book, you're crafting a very careful narrative. And when it gets translated into a movie, it's being handed off to other people that now are going to play up the parts they care about and diminish the parts that they don't. And so the story ends up changing, the narrative changes a bit. And in particular, one of his books was pretty drastically redone in the movie that came out. And I asked him, I'm like, what's that like as an author, to see your work go out into the world and become something different? And I loved his response. It's like having a child. You put all your hopes and dreams into them and what you expect them to be. But once they get out into the world, they become their own thing. It doesn't mean you're less proud of them. You're still very proud of what they've become. And I like that. And I have to imagine that when you're creating a world in a book or a series of books, you're creating that world as part of creating the story. But it's the world that you created that becomes important for the game.
And you're right on all of that, right? I think that, first of all, I'm not less proud of the video game we're creating, even though it may differ from my book. And I'm not less proud of the graphic novel series that's coming out, because it just delivers the same message, or almost the same message, in the same way. In a different way, rather, in a different medium. I'm proud of the fact that the property itself was worthy of those opportunities to kind of grow. If I'm now getting in front of a gamer that would never have picked up a book or never listened to an audiobook, and they're playing the game, they might go out and buy it now, or vice versa, where, hey, I'm buying this book. I was at a con last summer in Raleigh, and people would come up, and when I would turn my card over and tell them there was a QR code on there where they can get in and earn early play to jump into, an AR VR game, they bought the books because they are gamers, and they might not even read the books, but they think that if they read the books, there'll be clues to solve the game. And it's true. You'll find the story arcs and the character arcs, and you'll figure out where to go, and that'll give them clues. It'll give them an advantage in the game to read that stuff. And so there are ways to interconnect them. But you're right. I mean, I know that in my heart of hearts, the video game, just by me helping with the storyboarding, is never going to be the same. It cannot be. Because you're offered an avatar that you create that's going to take a different path than all of my characters, and you might run into them, you might avoid them, you might want to do your own thing. And so therefore you're living it on your own. It's its own living, breathing thing. It's just a new form of the art that I've created, and it's humbling in that respect. And like you said, it might not be exactly what I want, but that's okay. It's kind of outgrown me at that point.
So the Dungeons and Dragons thing to me is really, really fascinating, because it's always been right next to me, but never part of me. I've never played, and it's mostly because it's a time commitment that I just never feel like I've got. I'm doing 1,000 things, and that's never been one of them. Whereas Magic the Gathering was always, you could pull it into a day, because you could have a quick match that only lasted, a few minutes, especially if you were getting really efficient with it. But I love the DM role that happens in Dungeons and Dragons because that's the storyteller, the person that's kind of crafting the journey for everybody else. And that's a fascinating thing. And to know that there's actually people that are taking that and then actually becoming authors from it is fascinating. I did not know that was a thing that occurred.
Yeah, it's been around for a while. And if you think about it, some of the folks that broke ground in this have done exactly that. So if you look back at Margaret Weiss or Tracy Hickman in the Dragonlance series or the Ravenloft stuff, that they were basically characters that they had played, and they just memorialized those characters as part of the game, and they started writing literature about them. Or R.A. Salvatore with the Dark Elf trilogy, that was his character, and he just played his character. And then if he built a story around it, it might not have been exactly, point for point accurate to what his gameplay was, but he made a really exciting, and he's got 40 plus books just on his one character alone. So it's been around for a while, and that was what it was back when there wasn't video games. But now you have a chance to memorialize the battles and the same thing you did in your video game RPG. And, people are doing that. It's just the next generation of it. There's a subsegment of the readership that enjoys fantasy adventure or sci-fi stuff that also enjoys that too. And so it's fast growing, and it's being catered to by many authors that are also players. In your case, like you described, being a DM, I mean, that's where I got my chops. It was a lot of verbal storytelling for 20 years. And then it's how do I take that verbal storytelling and turn it into something that's written, best-selling series because of it. And that's exactly what I did. Was I took the best battle-tested plots, battle-tested characters, battle-tested villains, because I had played with them, and I baked them all into one final product, which was this series, because I knew that my players liked that. And as a DM, I enjoyed taking folks through those campaigns and stuff. And so that's really where I think I sharpened my steel doing that. And I think a lot of authors can do the same.
And going back to the video game piece and using a new technology and some of the things that I found disappointing in ones in the past where there was a great opportunity for things to be done better. And some of the things that I've already seen with like the Meta Quest and things done well that were actually maybe even surprising that they were done well. So like the Xbox Kinect was a great device that could track your body and your movement and stuff like that. And if you play first person shooters in something like Kinect, if I duck, my character should duck. If I do certain actions, the character should do that. That was the opportunity, but that's not what they did. They used the Kinect in a terrible way. Like you could build your own custom gun, for example. And in that environment, a bunch of parts are laid out and you kind of reach out, but you don't reach where you're looking. You reach out to where it wanted you to reach. It didn't like map to your visual. Huge missed opportunity on a bunch of fronts. With the Meta Quest, some of the things that I've seen done really, really well are the incorporation of your space into the environment, because you can do that whole laying out a play area and then staying within it. But it also ran into a similar problem where you had to rotate the space around to continue walking down a hallway, for example, because your room ended, instead of being able to now this is a harder technical thing to solve for, but like instead of it, understanding the space and trying to remap the game level to match up with it.
Yeah, those are tech challenges they're still going to have to get over, right?
Yeah.
It's not smooth yet. There's not smooth sailing.
Exactly. I think that the thing for me has always been like, how do you blur the lines between the game and the reality in a way that doesn't feel like it pulls you out of it? And so you do have limitations within the technology. So how do you craft the story and how do you craft the game that comes from that to work within the limitations of it? Because if you've got a controller in your hand, for example, like you do with the Meta Quest, you've always got those two controllers, then I'm always going to have that tactile feedback from it. I'm always going to have that. How do I fit that into that world? How do I fit that into the story? And if you screw that up, the game's ruined. If you get it right, the game's amazing and you're in it. It's one of the reasons why, like in the Star Wars universe ones, there's a bunch of them that are like lightsaber based, which makes sense because I've got a thing in my hand already.
Yeah. And you could think about that in terms of, the one I would use is like you two walk and there's nothing that you're walking on. You have to swing your arms. Right. That's unnatural. Right? It's just unnatural. It doesn't, and it takes away from the rest of the game, especially if it's a shooter kind of game, or like a lightsaber I get because you're holding something that there's a sensor that can pick up. But the minute you start walking with your arms and you're showing, it's just got to be something better than that. And we're not there yet. We'll get there. We might not be around to see it, but someone is going to enjoy it down the road, but we're creeping that way.
It's that part that pulls you out of it that so ruins the experience for me. I was down in Vegas recently for the U2 show at the Sphere. And the reason I bring that up is because it's a form of augmented reality. When you go in and you're in that environment and all of a sudden the sphere disappears and you see the strip beyond it, and then the strip starts dissolving until it's just the desert that was there before. It is very, very hard for your brain to pick up that that's not glass you're looking through and seeing this happen, because it's so high res, it totally surrounds you. And that interaction, that type of thing, your brain goes, yeah, that could happen. Like I could see this occurring. But when they change it into being things that are out of scale and out of proportion, if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't make you feel like you're shrinking into it. It just feels like you're dropped into it. That's jarring and it pulls you out of it. And so using the technology in a way that we can naturally adapt to is really, really important. And when it comes to something like a fantasy game, being dropped into it is very interesting because it is a different world. And so I don't know. I spent a lot of time thinking about like, how would I enter this world? How do I get pulled into it so that it makes sense and so that I feel natural? I don't feel like I've just been dropped into it. And I know that's not the point of like you creating your books and working on the game, but it is something I do spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about.
Yeah, we're not anywhere near the holodeck on Star Trek Enterprise just yet. But we're getting there close enough to play some of it. And I think that also you're seeing it now outside of gaming. You're seeing it in therapeutics for people that are the Alzheimer's patients and stuff like that, using it in health and human services. I think you're seeing it in sports where athletes are using it so there's no contact in practice, but the quarterback's able to see defenses as they're running live and stuff like that. There's plenty of other aspects of this that will expedite the growth of this thing and the maturity of this thing. But yeah, we're not there yet. It's an imperfect science.
It is, and it's constantly evolving, to your point, which is the fun part of being involved in it. JV, I want to give you a chance to like direct people towards your books, the games that are coming out. If they wanted to find out more, if they wanted to read your books, where would they find them?
Yeah, I'm really easy to find. I'm JV Hilliard, HILLIARD.com. You'll find my books there. You'll find news on the video games and the graphic novels there as well. Or you can find the Warminster saga pretty much ubiquitously. So if you're an Amazon shopper or you want to go to dragonmoonpress.com, my publisher, or you like audiobooks, you can find it on Audible or any of the 20 platforms that provide audiobook services. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm really easy, joe@jvhilliard.com. Imagine that. Or you can also find me on my social channels at JV Hilliard Books.
Well, JV, absolute pleasure, man.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Techtastic. I want to thank you personally for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep exploring and stay curious. Thank you for listening. If you are new here and enjoyed the content, please subscribe. It really helps us out. And if you are a regular listener, thanks so much for your continued support.
Overwhelmed by tech debt? Discover Vala AI, the solution to tech challenges with the simplicity of a click. No engineering background? No problem. Vala AI enables anyone to effortlessly tackle tech issues, freeing up your time from tech headaches. Make tech debt vanish with Vala AI, where your tech solutions are just a click away.